Turn our attentions to the international newspapers. Daphne Laurent has been scouring them for us. Daphne, we're going to start with a sad anniversary today. It's been 1 year since the murder of the Maltese journalist Daphne Caruana Galizia.
That's right, exactly a year ago, Daphne Caruana Galizia, one of Malta's most famous investigative journalists, was killed in a car bomb explosion. She published a report on her blog called Running Commentary. She published several reports, in fact, including stories accusing Maltese politicians of corruption. Her family and friends continue to call for a public inquiry. That's what the Malta Independent says. Now, in the Times of Malta, they're focusing on her nomination for an anti-corruption award organized by Transparency International. They hail her as a brave and effective journalist who exposed major corruption scandals on the website of Transparency International. The ceremony will be held next week.
A lot of anger is still about, the investigation into her murder, the government handling of it.
Well, we found this piece from Times of Malta as well. Michael Briguglio, Maltese activist and politician, accuses the government of, quote, doing its best to bury Daphne's memory and make us forget that the investigation is stalling. Now, from the Independent, they're talking about how Caruana was subjected to intimidation, threats and lawsuits because of her work. In fact, on her very last day, she'd been trying to reopen a bank account that had been frozen by the Maltese economy minister, one of several lawsuits that were pending against her. Her family, for their part, is accusing the government of a cover-up and lack of will in bringing those responsible to justice.
Let's cross over now, Daphne, to Australia. And the Prime Minister there says he's mulling a proposal to move the Australian embassy in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem.
Sounds like something that the US did not so long ago, right, Eve? It's making the front page of the Jerusalem Post today. Scott Morrison, the Australian Prime Minister, is mulling this proposition that he calls a sensible proposal and essentially would follow in the footsteps of the US, move the embassy to Jerusalem. Now, here on the front page of the Australian, Morrison says there's been no headway made in the two-state solution that Australia does support. This is why he's now considering moving the embassy. If he does, even the fact that he's considering it really marks a sharp shift in Australia's Middle East policy. Critics say, though, the timing is suspect because there's an upcoming by-election for the seat vacated by former Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull, who quit Parliament not so long ago. That seat happens to have a high Jewish constituency.
Okay, answering my question of why, Dipti, why? There have been a lot of different reactions, though, to that suggestion in the Australian papers.
Well, you have the left-leaning Sydney Morning Herald that calls it unprincipled, craven, new depths of stupidity. This columnist here accuses the government of betraying national interest to, quote, chase a few votes. Furthermore, the Jewish community should feel insulted by Morrison's blatant vote reaching. He's gaming them, the writer says, and in the process jeopardizing Australia's very important regional relationships like that of Indonesia. Now, on the other hand, the Daily Telegraph, a conservative paper, well, they call it a capital notion, saying any gesture of support for Israel will always be divisive. Australia should not feel constrained in expressing its faith in its alliance with Israel.
Of course, if it does go ahead with the move, it would be following the footsteps of US President Donald Trump, who spearheaded the move of the US Embassy to Jerusalem. Now, the US President's recent interview to 60 Minutes has gotten people talking, but not exactly for the content.
Not so much the content, but the decor, in fact. Astute viewers noticed a peculiar painting hung up in the White House during Donald Trump's 60 Minutes interview. You'll see it here in this graphic here. It's a picture on the bottom. It's a painting of Donald Trump sitting around a table, drinking presumably Diet Coke, laughing with Republican presidents past and present. Now, the Fort Worth Star-Telegram has spoken to the artist behind this painting. His name is Andy Thomas. He describes himself as a self-taught cowboy painter. Not sure that's a thing. Social media, though, as you can imagine, has not been clement on the US president, pointing out that Trump has been noticeably slimmed down in the painting and that it looks like a desperate attempt at legitimacy, as this user here says. Now, the artist, for his part, says he left a little subliminal message in the painting, a shadowy image of a woman walking to the table, a nod, perhaps, to a future female US president.
A lot of people are also talking about the types of drinks each president is actually drinking and what that means. And I see here that he's done a similar picture for Obama.
Exactly,
Previous
a democratic version, he says.
There you go. Finally, Diptyka, speaking of women there in that blurred image behind the US president, a new, I've seen this, Fendi scarf has got a lot of people talking for its striking resemblance to a certain part of the female body.
Well, we'll let the picture speak for itself. What does this scarf evoke for you, Eve? For many, it looks like a vulva, an expensive one at that, coming in at about 850 euros. It's a Fendi scarf, sadly complete with real fox fur. The Guardian says it makes wearers look like they're being born again. For info, it comes in blue and red. The pink version has now been pulled from sales after perhaps these comparisons to a female body part. Not sure if it was a deliberate move or not, but Fendi is headed by the eccentric Karl Lagerfeld, so you never know. He might just be pulling a big prank on us.
OK, Gypsy, we're going to have to leave it at that. Thanks indeed. Gypsy got on there with our news review. Time for a very quick break now. Back after this.